The RMS Titanic sank on April 15th, 1912. There were over 1,500 people that perished, but there were over 700 people who survived. Each of us have endured pain and sorrow in our lives, but imagine surviving that epic night on April 15th, 1912. Imagine getting woken up in the middle of the night, in the middle of the North Atlantic, and barely making it to a lifeboat, only to see the world's largest ship sink in front of your eyes. Here in Akron, Ohio, there are 5 people who are buried who survived the Titanic. In this 2-part series, we'll look at their lives before the voyage, the circumstances that put them on the Titanic, their experience on the ship, and life after the sinking of the Titanic. Mount Peace Cemetery in Akron, and these are the graves of Addie, Joan, and Ralph Wells, a mother and her 2 children. Addie was born in Newlyn, Cornwall, England on January 17, 1883, to William and Anne Travascus. William was a blacksmith and Anne a dressmaker. Addie was one of 6 children and followed in her mother's footsteps, listed as a dressmaker herself in the 1901 census. Addie was married in the summer of 1907 to Arthur Wells, a railway conductor originally from London. Their first child, Joan, was born in 1908, followed by a son, Ralph, in 1909. Addie's husband, Arthur, emigrated to Akron in 1910, accompanied by Addie's brother, Abednego. Both set out to America to find work and secure a home for the rest of the family, who would later join them. Addie was to join her husband and brother in Akron and had sold her household furnishings before leaving, retaining only family linen among a few other personal possessions. The family had originally been booked to travel on the Oceanic, but were transferred to the Titanic due to the coal strikes. She boarded the Titanic at Southampton with her 2 children as second-class passengers. Their ticket cost £23. While aboard, Addie made the acquaintance of several other Cornish passengers, most notably Mrs. Agnes Davies and Mrs. Emily Richards and their families. Addie Wells and Emily Richards had strolled the deck of the Titanic the night of the 14th, noticing how cold it was. Addie and her children were well asleep when the ship struck the iceberg, and she awoke to a tremendous jolt. She heard a commotion, and a friend yelled, "Dress quickly. There's some trouble, I believe, but I don't know what it is." She dressed herself and her children, but found attempts to make it to the upper decks difficult, as several familiar passages were now locked. Addie would later admit that she did not realize the seriousness of the situation and thought it was some sort of drill. An officer was shouting, "Come on here, lively now, this way, women and children." She was grabbed by someone who told her this way, and she and her family were put into lifeboat 14. As the boat pulled away, she saw a steerage men running up the deck, other men standing back and watching them soberly, and an officer with a revolver in his hand. She could hear faint cries from the Titanic and several shots, and claimed that the officer shouted to third-class men crowding around the boat, "Stand back there now. The first word out of you, and I'll..." She missed the rest. There were so many people in her lifeboat that Addie could not sit down. Instead, she held her children in her skirts to keep them dry. Also in the boat was Mrs. Agnes Davies and her son John Morgan Davies. Mrs. Davies was as confused as Mrs. Wells and asked her what it was all about. When the ship went down, people could still be heard screaming as they had been locked in their rooms, a memory that would cause Addie to have nightmares for years. The Wellses spent the night in the boat and were picked up at daybreak on the Carpathia, as she refused to sleep below, as supposedly they slept on deck. Upon arrival in New York, the Wells family were met in New York City by her husband and her brother Abednego, who had traveled from Akron. They spent the night of the 19th at the Star Hotel on Clarkson Street. While there, Mrs. Wells spoke to a newspaper reporter and told of her experience. The family then continued to Akron, where they lived at 613 Euclid Avenue, and they were joined by Arthur's younger brother William soon after. Addie and her family would live in Akron for the rest of their lives. Her husband Arthur worked as a machinist in a laundry shop. Whilst in America, she and her husband welcomed 2 more children, Arthur in 1918 and Charles in 1921. Living for many years at 712 Patterson Avenue in Akron, Addie was active in her local community and was a member of several organizations, including Our Lawney Chapter, Daughters of the British Empire, and also a member of the Canadian Legion Auxiliary. She spent her final days living at 876 Frederick Boulevard in Akron, and she became a widow in 1953 and later battled cancer of the liver. Addie died at home on 28th of May 1954. She was buried here at Mount Peace Cemetery in Akron. Her daughter Joan would live in Akron for the rest of her life. She graduated from West High School around 1924 and later worked as a stenographer, being employed since 1925 at the B.F. Goodrich Company, where she was a private secretary. She was engaged to William F. Latchman, a teacher at Coventry High School in Akron. A sickly lady in her adulthood, by 1933, Joan had 2 major operations and 2 blood transfusions, one of which was from her fiancé. On Saturday, July 8, 1933, her fiancé left Ohio bound for a fishing trip in a remote part of Canada's woods, whilst Joan was still poorly. He wrote to her, and the letter arrived on Monday, July 10th, by which time she was too ill to read it. The letter said, "When I get back, I expect to see you up and about. Hurry up and get well." Joan died later that day. Her cause of death was listed as sepsis, with contributory causes being given as pelvic cellulitis and peritonitis. Funeral arrangements were delayed in the hope of her fiancé being located and being able to attend the burial. Son Ralph also resided in Akron for the rest of his life. He worked as a shipping and receiving clerk at the George J. Meyer Manufacturing Company, a machine parts producer. Socially, he was a member of the Eagles Airy 2238 and later president of the Grand Airy Fraternal Order of Eagles. He was married on January 6, 1950 to Kalina Troutman. Kalina had been born in Scotland in 1915 and came to the U.S. in 1923. Ralph died suddenly of a stroke on September 27, 1972, age 62. Deanie, the gravestone that you're standing next to right there.
Yeah.
Can you read the top part for me?
In memory of Joan, beloved, only daughter of Arthur Han Wells.
So, in memory of Joan, beloved only daughter of Arthur H. and Addie D. Wells.
Yeah.
She was born in 1908. She was born in Cornwall, England.
And died in July 10th, 1933.
She was on the Titanic.
Yeah.
She was 4 years old when she was on the Titanic.
What?
She was sleeping in her room when the Titanic hit the iceberg, and she and her younger brother Ralph and her mother Addie put on their life jackets and crawled through a porthole to get out on deck to be put in a lifeboat. And they saw the Titanic sink to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah. On this side of the marker, Joan, who's the daughter, and Addie, the mother, were on the Titanic. Let's go around to the other side. You see on this side, it says beloved sons of Arthur H. and Addie D. Wells. So Ralph and Charles were the sons of Addie and Arthur. And Ralph was on the Titanic. And Charles was not. Charles was born in Akron, Ohio. He was never on the Titanic. Ralph was on the Titanic, and he was only 2 years old.
Wow.
He was 2 years old.
And then he saw it sink.
Yes, he did. But I'll bet you he doesn't remember because he was only 2.
Yeah.
Crazy, huh?
Yeah.
So thanks for watching part 1 of our 2-part series on the survivors of the Titanic, the lives of the survivors of the Titanic. In our next episode, we are going to Glendale Cemetery to meet 2 sisters who survived the Titanic, but unfortunately the ends of their lives were sad indeed. So please join us for that on the next one.
And also, like, comment, click the notification bell, and comment. Wait. Subscribe!
Subscribe!
Yeah!
Okay, folks, thanks for joining us. We'll see you on part 2.
Yep.
And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year! Feldman? Okay. These are all the people who died in the Titanic.
They survived.
But those are the ones who survived the Titanic. And everyone died. Okay, that's an outtake.
Oh, I love you, buddy. You're so funny.
Yeah, I know. I did the first outtake in a graveyard video. I've never been in a graveyard video before. And this is my first one.